The fluorescent lights of Carmine's diner hummed against the November darkness, casting pale yellow pools across the rain-slicked parking lot outside. Inside, in the corner booth worn soft by 15 years of use, Giovanni Bianchi sat with his coffee growing cold, watching the door with the patience of a man who had learned long ago that the best hunters simply waited. His tailored charcoal suit, custom-made in Milan, cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. A thin scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, silver now like a lightning strike frozen in time. He was 53 years old but carried the weight of someone much older, someone who had buried more than just bodies in the San Francisco fog. Enzo sat across from him, massive shoulders folded into the booth, his black shirt stretched tight across his chest. Nino stood by the window, his hand resting casually near his jacket where everyone knew a gun lived. They had been watching the diner for 3 hours because Giovanni had received a tip that someone from the Castellano family planned to move product through this location tonight. But nothing had happened. Just rain. Just silence. Just the sound of the kitchen door swinging open and closing as the night cook moved between stations. Outside, in the parking lot, Nora Morales was sleeping. She lay across the front seat of her 2008 Honda Civic, her head tilted at an angle that would leave her neck screaming by morning. The car had 234,000 miles on it, a dent in the passenger door shaped like a fist, and a check engine light that had been on for so long she no longer registered it as a problem. This was her home now. This and the shelter where she volunteered 3 afternoons a week, where she helped other women and their children fill out paperwork for programs that rarely came through. She had $78 to her name. $78. The number lived in her head constantly, a mathematical nightmare that never quite resolved. She had been a registered nurse once. That felt like a dream someone else had dreamed. The rain intensified at 3:18 a.m., the kind of rain that came to San Francisco like a punishment, cold and relentless and final. Nora's eyes snapped open at the sound of small footsteps running through the parking lot. Fast, desperate, the rhythm of someone very young moving in terror. She jerked upright, her nurse instincts overriding the exhaustion that had claimed her 3 hours earlier, and pressed her face against the fogged windshield. A child emerged from the darkness. She wore a soaked pink pajama top with unicorns fading across the chest, and nothing else except for skin blue with cold and feet that had been bare long enough to bleed. Her hair hung in wet ropes down her back. Blood ran from a cut on her forehead, mixing with the rain, creating pink streams that traced her cheekbones. She was maybe 7 years old. She was moving without direction, her body weaving between parked cars like something wounded that had not yet accepted it was dying. Nora did not hesitate. She did not think. She moved. The car door opened and she was running, her worn sneakers splashing through puddles, her breath coming in gasps that turned to clouds in the November air. The child saw her and something shifted in her face, not quite hope but the memory of what hope might feel like. "Baby, baby, come here," Nora said, and her voice came out steady even though her hands were shaking. She had learned to sound calm during the worst moments. That was something they taught you in nursing school before they taught you about medications and anatomy and all the things that mattered far less than a reassuring voice. The child collapsed against the diner's glass door, leaving bloody handprints at chest height, at shoulder height, a trail of desperation that would take the morning manager 3 hours to clean. Nora caught her before she could fall, scooping her small frame against her ribs, feeling the violent shaking that came from a body that had been outside in the cold without shelter for hours. The child's name was Emma. Nora would learn this within 60 seconds. What she did not know was that Emma's father sat in the corner booth of that diner, a man named Giovanni Bianchi, and that the blood running down this child's forehead was about to rewrite 3 lives in ways none of them could imagine. Nora carried Emma through the diner door, leaving it open behind her because she was trained to assess and triage, and this child needed warmth and medical attention in that specific order. The heat of the diner hit them both like a wall, and Emma made a sound like a wounded animal, a noise that came from somewhere deep in her chest where pain lived. "It's okay, baby, it's okay," Nora whispered, moving toward the counter where Teresa, the night shift waitress, stood frozen with a coffee pot in her hand. "I've got you, I've got you." The fluorescent lights flickered. Once. Twice. long enough for every person in that diner to blink and reset their vision. In the corner booth, Giovanni Bianchi's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. His hands went completely still. His eyes, dark like a winter sky before a blizzard, locked onto the small child shaking in Nora's arms. The child's hair, when it wasn't matted with blood and rain, was the color of his hair. The bone structure of her face, even distorted with terror and trauma, held the exact geometry of his own face at that age. Enzo saw the moment Giovanni recognized her. He saw it happen in real time, the way a man's entire body can freeze when something he believed dead suddenly rises from the grave. "That's," Enzo started to say, but Giovanni raised his hand. A small movement. Barely perceptible. The kind of gesture that could stop a man's heart or start a war. Giovanni stood slowly. Each movement controlled. Each gesture deliberate. He was 6'1" and 210 pounds of muscle that had been sculpted through decades of will rather than vanity, and when he moved toward the counter, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Nino's hand moved toward his jacket, but Giovanni's voice cut through the diner like a blade wrapped in ice. "Stand down." 2 words. That was all it took. Nora glanced up from examining Emma's forehead wound, her fingers gentle against the child's skin, checking the depth of the cut, assessing whether this would need stitches or if the shelter's first aid kit would suffice. She saw a man in a suit that cost more than 3 months of her lost income approaching, his expression absolutely blank, his eyes burning like someone was stoking a fire behind them. "I'm calling an ambulance," Nora said, her voice steady because she was trained in crisis and because something in her recognized danger the way other people recognize a familiar song. "This child has been exposed to extreme cold and she's bleeding. She needs—" "Her name is Emma," Giovanni said, and his voice was deep and solid like an oath, like something carved in stone centuries ago and never questioned since. "She is my daughter." Nora's hand stilled against the child's hair. "My daughter," he repeated, and this time there was something in his voice that made Nora understand in a single moment that she had just picked up the most precious thing this man owned, that she had wrapped her own jacket around the only reason he had not burned the entire city to the ground 3 months ago when Emma disappeared. Emma lifted her head slightly, her eyes swimming with exhaustion and pain and something else, recognition mixed with a fear so profound it seemed to age her beyond her years. "He found us again," the child whispered. Her voice came out like a candle in the wind, barely there, threatening to extinguish completely. "He found us again. I'm sorry, I tried to run but he found us." The kitchen door exploded open. Douglas Hale emerged from the back, his shirt partially unbuttoned, his face flushed with exertion or rage or both. He was 41 years old, with the kind of face that suggested handsomeness was something he had inherited rather than earned, and his eyes held the cold light of someone who believed that the world owed him things. Behind him came 2 San Francisco police officers in uniform, both of them with the tired expression of men who had been paid to look the other way so many times they no longer saw the mechanism of their own corruption. "That's mine," Douglas said, pointing at Emma. His words came out slurred and thick. "That child is in my legal custody. She's a ward of the state and I'm her appointed guardian." This was a lie. There was no legal custody. There was only a man with money and connections and a system so broken it had stopped pretending to work. There was only a child no one was looking for hard enough, and a mother no one believed, and a silence so complete it had become its own kind of violence. Giovanni Bianchi did not move. He did not speak. He simply stood there in his Italian suit, with his scarred face and his dark eyes, and looked at Douglas Hale with an expression of such profound contempt that grown men had confessed to crimes they did not commit just to escape that particular look. Nora pulled Emma closer. The child weighed nothing. She was all ribs and sharp angles and fear that had hollowed her from the inside out. And in that moment, in that fluorescent-lit diner with the rain hammering against the windows and the smell of coffee and grease and blood mixing in the air, Nora understood that she had just walked between a father and his daughter, and that everything that happened next would reverberate through 3 lives like a stone dropped into still water. "Give me the child," Douglas said, moving forward with the assumption of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Or I'll have these officers take her by force." The 2 police officers stepped forward in unison, their hands moving toward their belts. Enzo's breathing changed. Nino's stance shifted. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath, the way the world does just before the sky tears open. And then Giovanni Bianchi smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had just been given permission to do what he had been planning to do since the moment Emma disappeared 3 months ago. It was the smile of a hunter who had finally spotted his prey. "I think," Giovanni said, his voice dropping into registers that sounded like they came from somewhere deeper than his chest, "that you have made a mistake." 3 months earlier, the fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital hummed their mechanical song, indifferent to the fact that Nora Morales' entire life was about to collapse into a single cardboard box. She stood in her supervisor's office on the 4th floor, the morning sun bleeding through the windows in golden bars that illuminated dust particles but nothing hopeful. Her name tag hung crooked on her scrubs, the plastic dulled from 100 washings in a gas station sink. Supervisor Catherine Chen sat behind her desk, her eyes soft with the particular sadness of someone delivering bad news they did not cause but could not prevent. On the desk between them lay a single sheet of paper, a complaint form, each word a small blade. "I'm sorry, Nora," Catherine said, and she meant it. The tremor in her voice was genuine. "We received another complaint. Diana Whitfield called the board this morning. She claims you stole medication. Oxycodone. From the pediatric ward." Nora did not move. She did not speak. She had learned long ago that silence was often the safest response to accusations that would destroy her if she tried to defend herself. "I know it's not true," Catherine continued, her hands folded on the desk like she was praying. "I know you. I've watched you work double shifts for 2 years. You eat the patient trays that come back untouched. You volunteer on your days off. But my hands are tied. Diana Whitfield sits on the hospital foundation board. She donated the entire pediatric wing. When she calls, the board listens." The words came out measured, each one another small stone added to the weight already crushing Nora's chest. Catherine's eyes glistened. She did not want to do this. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. You can take your personal items. Security will walk you out." Nora turned and walked toward the door. Behind her, Catherine said something, an apology or encouragement, but the words dissolved in the hum of the fluorescent lights. The hallway stretched before her like a tunnel with no light at the end. Her legs moved automatically, carrying her to her locker in the break room, where she kept a spare jacket and her phone charger, the only items she owned that were not in the car. She placed them in the cardboard box the security guard offered her. The box was the kind that had once held surgical supplies. Now it held the evidence of her erasure. When she reached the parking lot, she sat in her 2003 Honda Civic and opened her checking account on her phone with shaking fingers. $78. That was everything. $78 to last until her next paycheck, which would never come because she no longer had a job. $78 to feed herself and a terrified 7-year-old girl who had nowhere else to go. On the passenger seat lay a crumpled envelope, ivory-colored, official-looking. The foreclosure notice for the apartment she had rented for 6 years. The bank had given her 90 days to vacate. 72 of those days had already passed. $22,000. The amount was so incomprehensibly large it had become abstract, like a number from a fairy tale, a sum that might as well have been $1 million. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but she recognized the speech pattern immediately. Douglas Hale. Her ex-boyfriend. The one she had left 8 months ago when he broke her collarbone and told her he loved her while she lay on the kitchen floor bleeding. "I see you, Nora. You can't hide from me. I know where you parked that piece of shit car." Another text followed it, and another, 12 messages in rapid succession, a verbal avalanche of threats and obsession and the particular cruelty of a man who believed ownership was the same thing as love. The final text contained a photograph. Douglas sitting at a bar with 3 uniformed police officers, all of them laughing, their arms around each other. The same officers who had responded to her 911 call 6 months ago when Douglas broke her jaw. who had looked at her injuries, looked at him, and decided there was nothing they could do. Nora deleted the texts without reading them fully. Deletion did not erase them. She knew that. They existed in some archive of the phone company, and more importantly, they existed in her memory, which was a harder place to delete anything. She started the car and drove away from St. Mary's Hospital, away from the job that had kept her barely alive, toward the one place in the world where she had found something worth protecting. The women's shelter occupied a converted Victorian mansion in the Mission District, its yellow paint peeling like sunburned skin. Nora had been volunteering there for 3 years, even when she was working full-time shifts, even when she was eating hospital food discarded from patient trays, even when staying awake an extra 6 hours meant she would hallucinate from exhaustion. She went because the women there, the ones society had deemed disposable, invisible, less than human, needed someone to see them. And Nora understood the weight of being unseen. The director, a woman named Susan with grey hair braided down her back, met her in the hallway outside the bathroom. The sounds of evening activities hummed through the building, the clink of dishes in the kitchen, the low murmur of women's voices in the common room, the television playing something no one was really watching. "Nora, I'm glad you're here," Susan began, and Nora recognized the tone. The careful voice of someone delivering news they knew would hurt. "Emma is in the bathroom again," Susan continued, nodding toward the closed door. "She's been in there for an hour. Won't come out. Social Services is picking her up tomorrow morning. We got the paperwork this afternoon." Through the bathroom door, Nora could hear the sound of small, muffled breathing. Not quite crying, but close to it. "Foster care?" Nora asked, though she already knew the answer. "Foster care. The girl won't speak, won't eat unless you're there, has extensive bruising on her arms and back that she refuses to explain. The system exists for children like her. They'll place her somewhere safe. The system. That sterile, bureaucratic, machine-like thing that processed human suffering into caseworker files and court dates and best practices. Nora had been through the system herself. She remembered the rotating series of foster homes, the ones where she was fed but not loved, the one where she was loved and then abandoned when the foster mother got pregnant and decided she did not have room for Nora anymore. The system existed to protect children. But it also existed to shuffle them from place to place, to ensure they never stayed anywhere long enough to matter. Nora knocked softly on the bathroom door. "Emma? It's me." The door opened a crack. A small face appeared, tear-streaked, with dark eyes too old for a 7-year-old. Emma had been living on the street for 14 months. Her mother had lost her in a custody battle to a grandmother who immediately sold her to a man for drug money. Emma had run, and she had been running ever since, until the shelter found her sleeping behind a recycling bin 3 months ago. She did not speak. Not because she could not, but because she had learned that nothing good came from speaking. Emma opened the door wider, and Nora saw the bruises on her small arms. Purple and green and yellow, in various stages of healing, like someone had gripped her and twisted, over and over. Nora's chest cracked open in a way that had nothing to do with her own pain and everything to do with the particular agony of witnessing a child's suffering. "Come here," Nora whispered. Emma moved into her arms, and Nora held her, not speaking, because sometimes words were just noise. What mattered was presence. What mattered was the fact that someone had shown up and was not leaving. Susan watched from the hallway, her expression caught between hope and the weight of bureaucratic inevitability. "She needs to be placed somewhere stable, Nora. Somewhere official. The shelter can't." "I know," Nora said. She held Emma closer. The child was so light she barely registered as weight, all bones and scar tissue and a stuffed rabbit clutched in her small fist, the rabbit's fur matted and stained from a journey no toy should ever have to take. Nora made a decision in that moment. A decision that was irresponsible and reckless and probably illegal in 17 different ways. But the alternative was watching this child disappear into the foster system, and Nora understood better than most people ever would what that meant. That night, long after the shelter had closed its doors and locked them against the darkness outside, Nora did not go home. She could not. Home was a place that no longer existed. Instead, she drove to an all-night diner on the edge of the city, a place called Rose's, where the coffee was endless and the fluorescent lights never turned off and no one asked questions when you ordered a single cup of water but stayed for 6 hours. Emma slept in the back seat, wrapped in a donated blanket that smelled like detergent and other people's generosity. In the diner, Nora ordered hot chocolate with the quarters she had collected from the break room sofa over the past 3 weeks. 47 cents in coins, enough for a small drink with no whipped cream. Hold the marshmallows. She sat in the corner booth, positioned so she could see the car, and she watched her daughter, because that was what Emma had become, her daughter, in every way that mattered, sleep in the back seat and try to calculate how long $78 could sustain 2 people. If she did not eat, only Emma would eat. If she washed in gas station bathrooms and hand-washed her scrubs in the sink and never bought gasoline unless absolutely necessary, maybe she could stretch it to 3 weeks. Maybe 4 if she was very careful. But then what? The foreclosure notice crumpled in her pocket felt heavier than paper should weigh. $22,000. $22,000 that did not exist, in a world where she could not even afford to feed a child properly. Outside, the November wind tore through the empty streets like a blade wrapped in ice, and somewhere in the darkness, Douglas Hale was looking for her. Not to reconcile or apologize or explain. He was looking for her because she had left, because she had tried to belong to herself instead of to him, and men like Douglas Hale did not accept that kind of rejection. Nora's phone buzzed again. Another text, this one with a video attached. She opened it, and there was Douglas, laughing, with his arm around a woman in a high-rise office. The woman was older, elegant, wearing clothes that cost more than Nora earned in a month. Deanna Whitfield. The name beneath the photo confirmed it. Below the video, Douglas' message, I know people. Important people. People who make problems disappear. Your problem is about to disappear, Nora. And you're going to watch it happen. Nora deleted the message. But deletion, she was learning, solved nothing. The rain hammered against the diner windows like fists demanding entry, and the clock above the counter read 3:22 in the morning. Nora Morales sat in the corner booth, positioned so she could see Emma sleeping in the backseat of her Honda Civic outside, and tried to calculate how long $78 could sustain 2 people. If she did not eat, only Emma would eat. If she washed in gas station bathrooms and hand-washed her scrubs in the sink and never bought gasoline unless absolutely necessary, maybe she could stretch it to 3 weeks. Maybe 4 if she was very careful. But then what? The foreclosure notice crumpled in her pocket felt heavier than paper should weigh. $22,000. $22,000 that did not exist in a world where she could not even afford to feed a child properly. The November wind tore through the empty streets outside like a blade wrapped in ice, and somewhere in the darkness, Douglas Hale was looking for her. Not to reconcile or apologize or explain. He was looking for her because she had left, because she had tried to belong to herself instead of to him, and men like Douglas Hale did not accept that kind of rejection. Giovanni Bianchi sat alone in the back booth, a cup of black coffee cooling in front of him, untouched. He was a man of 6'1" with shoulders that filled the booth like he was built for taking up space in rooms. His suit cost more than a year of Nora's old rent, charcoal wool, tailored to perfection, a white silk shirt unbuttoned at the collar revealing the edge of a tattoo that wound around his collarbone. His dark hair showed silver at the temples, and a thin scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, pale against his olive skin. A gold watch caught the fluorescent light on his wrist, worth more than most people's cars. He was waiting for nothing in particular, a man who had learned long ago that waiting was sometimes a form of power. His 2 lieutenants, Enzo and Nino, sat 2 tables over, positioned for sight lines and exit routes, as they always were. Giovanni had not slept in 37 hours. His daughter Emma, age 7, had been missing for 4 months. The search had torn through San Francisco like a storm, leaving destruction in its wake. Every contact burned. Every favor called in. Every corner of the city turned over and shaken. Nothing. Until 2 weeks ago when a surveillance camera caught a glimpse of a small girl in a red coat at the Harbor Mission homeless shelter. The girl had been placed there by someone, protected by someone. Someone invisible. The diner door swung open and Douglas Hale stumbled through, eyes wild, reeking of bourbon so strong it cut through the stale coffee smell. He was 34, muscular from a prison stretch 8 years back, with the kind of handsome that was always a weapon. His eye scanned the diner, passed over Giovanni without recognition, locked on Nora. "There you are," Douglas said, his voice thick and dangerous. "There you fucking are." Nora stood up. The motion was pure instinct, pure survival. "Douglas, you need to leave." "The restraining order." "The restraining order means shit." He moved toward her, each step heavy with intention. "You think you can ignore me? You think you can take my kid and run? Emma's not your child. She's never been." He crossed the space between them in 2 strides and grabbed her by the throat. The movement was efficient, practiced. His fingers wrapped around her neck like a collar, and he slammed her against the kitchen door frame hard enough that the sound echoed through the diner. The night cook, a man named Miguel who had worked the graveyard shift for 6 years without incident, stepped back with his hands raised. Emma screamed. The sound came from outside, muffled by the car windows, but it cut through everything else. A child's terror. Pure and absolute. Nora clawed at Douglas's hands, but he was too strong, too heavy, his thumbs pressing into her windpipe. "You're mine, Nora. You've always been mine. Nobody leaves me. Nobody." The cook yelled for him to stop, but Douglas backhanded him with his free hand, sent him stumbling backward into the prep counter. Nora's vision darkened at the edges, her knees buckling, her hands falling away from his wrists because her body was shutting down, because oxygen was not reaching her brain, because this was how it ended, in a diner at 3 in the morning with her daughter screaming outside and no one coming to help. He threw her to the checkered floor. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs. His boot came next, catching her ribs, and white pain exploded across her side. She curled around it, tasting blood, her body folding in on itself like a letter being sealed. Douglas grabbed her hair, yanked her head back. His fist connected with her left eye. Once. Twice. The socket swelled immediately, her vision collapsing to a pinpoint. His hands found her throat again, and the handprints bloomed purple and red on her skin like flowers growing in fast motion. Emma was screaming outside, really screaming now, the car door handle probably being pulled again and again by small hands that did not understand why Nora was not coming, why the world had gone wrong. That was when Giovanni Bianchi stood up. The temperature in the diner dropped. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to pause. Douglas did not notice yet, too focused on Nora bleeding on the floor, on the power of his own violence, on the bourbon singing in his veins telling him he was invincible. But the cook noticed. The late-night waitress noticed, the one who had been refilling coffee cups in this diner for 10 years without incident. She went pale, her hands trembling, her body backing toward the wall with the automatic motion of prey recognizing the arrival of a predator. Giovanni walked forward in perfect silence. Enzo and Nino flanked him like wolves closing on a wounded animal. Each movement deliberate. Each step a choice. His voice, when it came, was quiet as a knife sliding from leather, and it carried the weight of a man who had not raised his voice in 15 years because he did not need to. Step away from them. Now. Douglas turned, sneer twisting his face. Who the fuck are you? Do you know who I know? I've got half the SFPD in my... Recognition hit him like a physical blow. Every criminal in San Francisco knew Giovanni Bianchi's face. Every man who made his living outside the law knew what that scar meant, what that watch represented, what the way he stood with his hands at his sides indicated about the violence contained within his frame. Douglas's sneer melted into fear. His hands released Nora's throat. Giovanni did not raise his voice. You put your hands on what belongs to me. Nora, bleeding, tried to stand. Failed. Her ribs screamed. Emma was outside, still screaming, and she could not reach her, could not move, could not. Giovanni signaled Enzo with one finger. Just one finger. Enzo moved forward and grabbed Douglas by the collar, slammed him against the counter with one arm like he was a doll made of cloth. Douglas fought, elbows flying, but Enzo was a man who had spent 20 years solving problems that required muscles and patience. He held Douglas still with the ease of someone restraining a child. Giovanni knelt beside Nora. This was their first real moment, though neither of them knew it yet. His hand, surprisingly gentle, touched her chin and tilted her face to assess the damage. One eye swollen completely shut. Blood running from her nose and split lip. Handprints vivid on her throat, blooming like bruises that would deepen for days. Her breathing shallow and ragged. She tried to speak. Could not. Her voice box had been crushed. Emma's crying grew louder. She had gotten the door open. Small feet running. A child's voice calling out Nora's name, calling it again and again, a prayer repeated until it became a weapon. Giovanni's eyes went to Emma running through the diner door, wet from rain, barefoot because she had been yanked from sleep and thrown into the night. Back to Nora. Back to the woman who was bleeding on a checkered floor. The realization moved through him like lightning through water. This was the woman who had protected his daughter. The invisible woman who had kept Emma alive on nothing. Who had given her everything she had, which was almost nothing, but had given it anyway because that was what love looked like, not power, not money, not the ability to command men in suits. Love looked like $78 stretched across 3 weeks. Love looked like this woman, broken and bleeding, with a child running toward her through the diner of a sleeping city. Nora whispered through broken lips, "Please don't hurt him. I just want to disappear. I just want Emma to be safe. Please. I just want to." She passed out. Giovanni lifted her like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. His men had seen him kill. Had seen him negotiate. Had seen him make decisions that cost lives. But they had never seen him hold anyone like this, with his face a landscape of something they could not name. "Nino, get my car. Enzo, take Emma." Emma whimpered, resisting, reaching for Nora. Enzo crouched down, made his voice soft. "Hey Principessa. Your papa needs to help Nora. We're going to go get warm, okay? We're going to get you safe." Emma's bottom lip trembled. "I want Nora." "I know, baby. Nora's coming. Papa's got her. We just need to go now." Enzo lifted Emma into his arms, and she did not resist this time because even a 7-year-old could feel the shift in the room, the arrival of something that would change everything. Giovanni looked at Douglas trembling against the counter, eyes wide, understanding for the first time what he had done. "And him?" Enzo asked, nodding. Giovanni's voice was ice. "Make sure he understands the cost of touching her. But keep him breathing. I'm not done with him yet." 3 minutes later, the diner was empty except for Miguel the cook, who would spend the rest of his life forgetting he had ever seen this night. Giovanni's black SUV pulled away into the rain, carrying a woman he had just met but somehow already loved, carrying his daughter who finally felt safe, carrying the beginning of something that would reshape San Francisco in ways no one could yet imagine. Behind them, Douglas Hale sat on the checkered floor, trembling like a bird caught in a cage, finally understanding that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from the warehouse eaves like a clock counting down to nothing. Nora Morales woke on silk sheets that felt like a betrayal, soft and expensive in a way her body had learned to distrust. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, San Francisco lay gray and still under the dawn. She could hear Giovanni's men moving through the building below, footsteps on concrete, low voices, the distant sound of weapons being cleaned and checked. Armed. Watching. Waiting. She slipped out of bed without waking Emma, who slept with one small hand curled against the pillow, finally peaceful in a way children of the streets never were. Nora stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of that small chest. This was the cost of letting someone matter. This was what happened when you let yourself love something in a world that destroyed beautiful things. "Everyone I touch gets destroyed," she thought, and the thought was sharp and certain like a blade through her ribs. The warehouse was massive, ceilings 3 stories high, exposed brick and steel beams, everything worth more than her entire life had ever been. Giovanni's office was on the 2nd level, accessed by a metal staircase that echoed with each step. She found paper on his desk, thick, expensive paper, the kind people used for important things, and a pen that probably cost more than she had eaten in a week. $78. That was all she had left. $78 and a foreclosure notice that had fallen from her pocket in that diner booth while her throat was bruised black and Douglas's rage still hung in the air like smoke. Her hand shook as she began to write. The coffee smell drifted up from the kitchen below, that rich dark smell of a life she was never meant to live. Her stomach twisted, too knotted to eat, too twisted to do anything but sit in Giovanni's leather chair, leather that probably came from somewhere exclusive, somewhere that cost money, and try to find the words that would make him understand. That would make him let her go. 40 minutes. That was how long it took to explain the end of something that had barely begun. She wrote about finding Emma at the shelter 3 months ago, about how the girl had been brought in screaming, abandoned in a bathroom stall, and how Nora had held her and promised her she would not disappear. She wrote about the car, about sleeping in the back seat of a 2003 Honda with the windows fogged and the cold seeping in through every crack. She wrote about $78 being stretched across groceries and shelter fees and the medication Emma needed for the nightmares. She wrote about Douglas's hands on her throat. About waking up in silk sheets. About Giovanni's gentleness, which had terrified her more than Douglas's violence because gentleness meant hope, and hope was dangerous when you were someone like her, someone with nothing, someone who had never kept anything good because keeping good things meant losing them in more painful ways. She wrote, "You made me feel human again. You made me feel like I mattered. But I can't let you and Emma pay for my mistakes. Diana won't stop. Douglas won't stop. They'll destroy you to destroy me, and I won't let that happen. I can't. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I'll disappear the way I should have disappeared the night Douglas found me in that diner. Please tell Emma I love her. Please tell her that some people are worth saving. She just wasn't worth saving enough to stay." The letter shook in her hands. She folded it carefully, propped it against Giovanni's laptop so he would see it first thing, and reached for her backpack. Everything she owned fit inside it: 2 pairs of pants, 3 shirts, a toothbrush, a hair tie, the worn copy of Charlotte's Web that Emma had started to love. She could have a head start. She could disappear into Sacramento or Portland. She could change her name again, get a job under the table at another diner, and maybe this time no one would find her. Maybe this time she could actually disappear. Her hand was on the doorknob when Emma's voice came from the bedroom, small and sleep-soft and devastating. "Nora? You there?" Nora's hand froze. Her entire body went still in the way of animals caught in headlights. She closed her eyes. Tears ran hot down her face, salt and despair mixing with the ghost of sleep. Then footsteps behind her. Heavy footsteps. Giovanni's voice, quiet and absolutely certain, "Going somewhere?" She turned, and her eyes found the floor instead of his face. "I can't stay. You don't understand. I won't let them hurt you because of me." Giovanni took the backpack from her hands and set it down on a glass table without looking at it. "You think running protects us? It doesn't. It just means you face them alone." "I've been alone before," she whispered. "I'll survive. Maybe you will. But Emma won't. She woke 3 times last night calling for you. She needs you." Nora started, but he stepped closer, and his face was open in a way that made her chest break. "I need you," he said, and those 4 words contained everything. Every night he had spent awake wondering if he would ever feel safe enough to trust anyone again. Every year he had spent building an empire that meant nothing because it was empty. "I'm not a man who begs, Nora. I don't ask for things. I take them. But I'm asking you now. Stay. Not because you're grateful. Not because you're afraid of what happens if you leave. Stay because you matter to me." She looked up then, and Giovanni's eyes were grey like storm clouds, and there was something in them that looked like the same kind of broken that she carried.
You think I bring every stray into my home? You think I hold anyone like I held you in that diner?
Giovanni's voice was like thunder, low and solid. That kind of person doesn't come along twice, Nora. I won't let you disappear. Douglas will. Douglas is about to learn what happens when you threaten my family. And Diana? His smile was cold, sharp as glass. Diana Whitfield's perfect life ends today. He made 3 phone calls. Nino took the first. Enzo took the second. A man named Carmine, who managed things the government's way, took the third. By 6:53 a.m., 12 federal agents had a warrant with Diana's and Douglas's names written in bureaucratic black ink. The kind of warrant that couldn't be bought off. The kind that came from people who had been waiting for just this kind of opening. The battering ram hit Douglas Hale's apartment door at 6:48 a.m., and wood splinters exploded into the hallway like shrapnel. Flashbangs detonated, that terrible white light and the sound of thunder indoors, and federal agents in tactical gear flooded through every room. Douglas stumbled out of bed in boxers and confusion, screaming something that became incoherent when an agent shoved him against the wall, and the cold metal of handcuffs bit into his wrists. Douglas Hale, you are under arrest for aggravated assault, stalking, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. What? No. Douglas's face was white, the color of something dead. I know people. I have friends at SFPD. I have protection. The lead agent smiled without warmth. Your friends are in the van outside wearing handcuffs too. The corrupt cops who had laughed at Nora's restraining order, who had told her there was nothing they could do, who had let Douglas walk free, they were being led out of headquarters in cuffs while news cameras rolled and captured every second. Their faces. Their shame. Their understanding that the game had changed. Douglas collapsed to his knees, and his voice became something less than human. This is a mistake. I didn't, she's lying. She's crazy. The agent read him his rights while Douglas trembled like a bird caught in a cage, finally understanding that he had triggered something beyond his reach. Outside, satellite news vans. Neighbors filming on their phones. His face on every screen in San Francisco by 8 a.m., being dragged out of his apartment in handcuffs, begging, crying, his voice hoarse and broken. Giovanni watched the footage on his laptop, Nora beside him on the edge of his desk. Her hand shook as she gripped the metal edge. Douglas on screen was being led into a federal holding facility, and his face was the face of a man who had finally understood that actions had consequences that money and connections could not dissolve. A bullet would have been too quick, Giovanni said quietly. Too easy. Too merciful. This is better. 40 years minimum in a federal facility. Every morning waking in a cell knowing she's free. That's the kind of justice that stays with a man. Nora said nothing. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, on the image of the man who had haunted her life finally disappearing behind iron doors. At 9:15 a.m., Diana Whitfield was sitting in her Pacific Heights mansion, all Italian marble and absurd wealth, having coffee in a Limoges cup when her lawyer called. His voice was strange, fractured, afraid. Diana, the FBI just served warrants on the Women's Hope Foundation. Everything. Financial records, emails, personnel files. What? She set down her cup. Why would they? Her accountant called 2 minutes later. They're freezing all your assets. The IRS. They're claiming massive discrepancies in foundation accounting. Diana, this is serious. Her publicist called while she was still processing the accountant's words. Ms. Whitfield, every news station is running a story about fraudulent charity operations. There are women coming forward saying you, she paused, and Diana could hear the damage in that pause. Saying you threatened them. That you embezzled donations. That you deliberately placed vulnerable women in abusive situations and then silenced them when they tried to report it. Diana turned on the television. Her own face stared back at her, caught from her charity gala last month, smiling that perfect smile that had opened every door in San Francisco's elite circles. Beneath her face, Women's Hope Foundation charity fraud, founder arrested on federal charges. Federal agents were raiding the foundation offices in the background of the news footage. Boxes being carried out. Computers being seized. A woman Diana recognized, one of the shelter directors, was being interviewed, and her face was streaked with tears as she described how Diana had threatened her, how she had paid women to stay silent about abuse, how she had diverted $3.2 million in donations into private accounts. Diana's phone exploded. Board members resigning. Donors demanding refunds. Her society friends suddenly unreachable when she called. Her housekeeper looking at her with something new in her eyes. Pity, maybe. Or disgust. At 10:33 a.m., the knock on her door was authoritative and final. Federal agents in dark suits, their credentials already out. Diana Whitfield, you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, and witness tampering. No. Diana's voice rose. No. I have lawyers. I have connections.
Do you know who I am?
The agent's voice was flat, the voice of someone who had taken down people far more powerful than Diana Whitfield. You're inmate 847392. That's who you are now. They cuffed her wrists, cuffed them like she was common, like she was nothing, and led her out while photographers captured everything. Her designer robe was dirty from being shoved into the FBI van. Her perfect makeup was running with tears. Her voice was shrill and breaking as she screamed about lawyers and mistakes and the importance of her name. The processing center at County Jail showed Diana being stripped of her clothes and given orange scrubs. Her manicured hands being fingerprinted. Her face, without makeup, in the harsh fluorescent light, swollen from crying, slack with the shock of understanding that 40 years in federal prison meant her life had ended. Giovanni watched this footage too, his arm around Nora's shoulders. She was crying, but not from sadness. The relief was pouring out of her in shaking sobs because the weight of 2 years of running, of Douglas's rage, of Diana's systematic destruction of every shelter and every chance at stability, was finally lifting. It's over? She whispered. Giovanni nodded. It's over. They can't touch you anymore. She collapsed into his arms, and he held her while she broke, his men watching from a careful distance, understanding that they were witnessing something private, something sacred. In 15 years of working for Giovanni Bianchi, they had never seen him like this. Never seen him hold anyone like they mattered more than his empire. Never seen the most dangerous man in San Francisco be gentle to someone who was not even trying to be strong anymore. The rain had stopped. The sky was clearing toward something like light. 3 weeks had passed since the federal agents led Diana Whitfield out of her penthouse in handcuffs, her designer robe dragging on marble floors that had never known a homeless woman's footsteps. Nora Morales stood in the mirror of a bathroom that was not hers, watching the bruises fade from purple to yellow-green like autumn leaves surrendering to winter. The handprints on her throat had softened to shadows. The split in her lip was closing. Her reflection showed a woman she barely recognized, a woman who was healing. Giovanni Bianchi sat at his desk in the warehouse office, morning light cutting through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city he had spent 15 years controlling. In front of him lay a single document from the California Nursing Board. Nora's license had been fully restored. Every false complaint Diana Whitfield had filed had been expunged from the record. Gone. Like it never happened. Like Diana's systematic cruelty had been written in sand and the tide had washed it clean. The job offer from St. Mary's Hospital sat beside it. Trauma unit. $48,000 a year. Benefits. Respect. Everything she had lost when Douglas's violence had destroyed her professional life. Nora held the envelope in trembling hands as she stood in Giovanni's office that afternoon. The paper felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She couldn't make her voice work properly, couldn't form words that matched the magnitude of what this meant, not just employment, but restoration. Not just a job, but proof that she was still worth saving. That everything she had endured had not erased who she was. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Giovanni rose from his chair, and in that simple movement there was something that his men had never witnessed in 15 years of working for him. There was no performance. No performance of power. Just a man looking at a woman like her. Gratitude was the only currency that mattered. "You don't need to thank me. What you did for Emma, what you were willing to do when you had nothing left, that was already payment. This is just putting the world right again." Emma ran through the office door without knocking, the way only a 7-year-old who finally felt safe could run. She grabbed Nora's hand with the certainty of a child who no longer feared abandonment.
"Can Nora come to my dance recital? Please, please, please?"
Her eyes were wide, dark, alive with hope in a way they had not been when Nora first found her crying in the shelter.
"Can she watch me dance?"
Nora knelt to Emma's height, and her voice broke on a single word, "Yes." That night, the warehouse balcony stretched out beneath them like a platform suspended between sky and city. Giovanni and Nora stood at the railing, the lights of San Francisco spreading below in patterns that looked almost like constellations. The same balcony where they had first kissed. But the rain had stopped now. The sky was clearing. Nora's voice was quiet against the stillness.
"What happens now? Between us?"
Her hands gripped the railing like it was the only solid thing in a world that had shifted beneath her feet so many times she had stopped believing in solid ground. Giovanni turned to face her.
"What do you want to happen?"
She was silent for a long moment. The wind moved through her hair, and in the city lights below, she could see the reflection of everything she had survived. "I spent 2 years convinced that I deserved everything bad that happened to me. Diana made me believe I was worthless. Douglas made me believe my body was his property to destroy. You made me remember that I'm human. That I matter." Giovanni's hand rose to touch her face, not the swollen side anymore, but the healing side, the side that was learning to smile again. His fingers traced the fading bruises with a gentleness that contradicted everything people believed about him. Everything they were right to believe about him. "You matter to Emma. You matter to me." His voice was like thunder wrapped in silk. "That is the only truth that matters. I'm not part of your world. I don't know how to be part of this." Nora gestured vaguely at the office below, at the men in suits, at the empire that rose and fell at his word. "You don't need to be. You just need to stay."
"Can you do that?"
She nodded, tears falling now like rain that had finally found permission to fall. "Yeah. I can do that." He kissed her then, careful of her still healing lip, and his men watching from inside the office window knew without being told that something permanent had shifted. Not just in Giovanni, but in what he was willing to protect. Not just his empire, but a family. A real one. Emma found them minutes later, giggling from the doorway like she had discovered a secret that belonged to her alone.
"Are you kissing?
Is Nora going to be my mommy now?" Nora's breath caught. She turned to Emma, kneeling down to her level. "Would you like that, sweet girl?" Emma's arms wrapped around Nora's neck with the desperation of a child who had learned early that people leave, that love disappears, that safety is temporary. "I want that so much. I love you, Nora. I love you." Nora's voice shattered into pieces and reformed as something stronger. "I love you too, Emma. So much." From inside the warehouse office, Enzo and Nino watched this unfold. Nino shook his head slowly, the kind of head shake that meant the world had fundamentally changed and there was no going back. Who would have thought? The boss undone by a homeless nurse. Enzo was watching Giovanni hold Emma while Nora stood beside them, finally whole. Not undone. Rebuilt. There's a difference. The third floor of the warehouse became Nora's space. Giovanni had his security team move every piece of furniture out, leaving only bare walls and sunlight from windows that overlooked the city. Nora painted Emma's room soft blue. They hung pictures together, drawings Emma had made of Nora, of the two of them, of a family that was being constructed moment by moment from pieces that had been broken. On the first night they moved in, Giovanni watched from the doorway as Nora read to Emma before bed. Her voice was gentle, patient, reading the same picture book 3 times because Emma asked, because Emma needed the repetition of love made audible. When the story ended, Nora kissed Emma's forehead, and the little girl's eyes closed with the peace of a child who knew she would wake up and the people she loved would still be there. This, Giovanni thought, watching Nora's exhausted smile as she turned off the lamp. This is what I've been fighting for all along. The trial date for Douglas Hale was set for federal court in 6 weeks. The prosecutor assigned to his case was a woman named Agent Catherine Stone, someone who had spent the last 12 years taking down men exactly like him. Men who believed that violence could create ownership. Men who had learned too late that the system they thought protected them was the same system that would dismantle them with brutal efficiency. Giovanni's security team delivered the final report. Douglas would face minimum 43 years in federal prison. Diana Whitfield, 51 years old and facing the first genuine consequence of her life, was receiving 41 years. The corrupt police officers who had laughed off Nora's restraining order, who had friends in precincts that made them untouchable, they were no longer untouchable. They were unemployed. They were facing charges. They would spend the next decade trying to survive in the same system they had abused. Not with bullets, Giovanni explained to Nora as they sat in his office reviewing the final documentation. With justice. Slower. More permanent. More painful. She believed him. For the first time in 2 years, she believed that the people who had tried to destroy her were actually going to face destruction in return. They'll never touch you again. I made sure of it. His hand covered hers on the desk between them, and in that gesture was a covenant older than Italian blood, deeper than Mafia code. It was simply the promise of one human being to another, I will protect you. 6 months later, Nora Morales walked through the doors of St. Mary's Hospital wearing clean blue scrubs with her name embroidered in white thread, N. Morales, RN. The trauma unit hummed with the organized chaos of an ER at 3 in the afternoon. Patients in bed separated by curtains. Monitors beeping. The smell of antiseptic and fear and human suffering. The place where she had once belonged and had been forced to abandon. Her supervisor, Dr. Patricia Chen, met her at the nurse's station. The woman who had fired her 18 months ago due to complaints that had come from Diana Whitfield's carefully placed phone calls now had tears in her eyes. Nora, I'm sorry. We should have protected you. We should have fought harder when those complaints came in. Nora touched her arm, and her voice was steady in a way it had never been before. You did what you thought was right. I'm just glad to be back helping people. By 4 o'clock, she had treated 7 patients. A construction worker with a lacerated arm. A child with asthma. An elderly woman having chest pain. The work of saving lives, of making small differences in the margins of people's worst moments. It was the work she had been born to do. Emma's dance recital was that evening at 7. The auditorium was crowded with parents and siblings and grandparents, all of them watching as children in pink leotards and point shoes moved across the stage in patterns they had practiced for months. Emma was in the middle of the formation, her face concentrating, her body telling a story about butterflies and flowers and the triumph of finding beauty in a difficult world. Giovanni and Nora sat in the audience holding hands. When Emma spotted them, she waved, a small gesture of acknowledgement that meant everything. I see you. You came. You're here. After the recital, Emma ran to them with her hair still in the tight bun the teacher had created, her face flushed with the effort of performance. Did you see me? Did you see? You were perfect, Nora said, scooping her up and spinning her around while Emma laughed, a sound like bells, a sound like healing. Giovanni watched his daughter and the woman who had become her mother, and in his chest there was a feeling he had stopped believing possible when his own mother died 30 years ago. There was peace. Not the absence of danger. Not the absence of enemies. Just the presence of people who mattered more than power. That night, a summer thunderstorm rolled in across San Francisco. The same kind of storm that had brought Nora to Giovanni's diner that night 2 years ago, soaked and terrified and certain that her life was over. But this time, when the rain fell, she was standing on the warehouse balcony wrapped in his arms, watching lightning crack the sky open.
You know what's funny?
She asked as the thunder rolled overhead. 6 months ago I was sleeping in my car with $78 and no hope. I thought my life was completely over. I thought the best part of me had already been destroyed.
And now?
She turned in his arms to face him. Now I have everything. A job that matters. A home. Emma. You. How does that happen? How does a life change that fast? Giovanni kissed her forehead as rain soaked their clothes, as lightning illuminated the city below. Sometimes it takes hitting rock bottom to understand who's willing to pull you back up. And sometimes the most dangerous man in a city is the one who's willing to burn it all down for the people he loves. She smiled against his chest. That's you. That's me. They stood together in the storm, and the rain that once felt like drowning now felt like cleansing. I learned something, Nora's voice carried across the silence. Monsters aren't always who you expect them to be. Sometimes they wear designer clothes and throw charity galas. Sometimes they hide behind badges and uniforms and the authority that protects them. But heroes aren't always who you expect either. Sometimes they're the ones everyone fears. Sometimes mercy looks like justice. Sometimes family isn't blood, it's simply the people who show up when everyone else walks away. Douglas Hale is serving 43 years in federal prison. Diana Whitfield is serving 41, every penny she stole being returned to the charities she destroyed. The corrupt police officers lost their badges, their freedom, their ability to hurt anyone ever again. Emma is thriving, dance classes, school friends, therapy to heal the wounds that violence carved into her childhood. Nora is saving lives again, one patient at a time. And Giovanni Bianchi discovered that protecting your family doesn't always require violence. Sometimes it requires opening your door to a woman with nothing but $78 and a heart big enough to save his daughter. That final image, Giovanni, Nora, and Emma in the warehouse kitchen cooking dinner together, laughing, Emma spinning in her dance costume, Nora's head thrown back in joy, Giovanni's rare smile soft and real. This is what winning actually looks like. Not power. Not fear. Family. After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. If this story moved you, drop a like right now and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story about love, justice, and the unexpected places we find family. Comment below and tell us, have you ever been saved by someone unexpected? Your story matters to us. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.